Inclusive growth in India. You have more than half the population, 65% in fact, engaged in agriculture in one form or the other. Agriculture accounts for less than a fourth of GDP, so there you have one fundamental mismatch. And at the same time, Indian agriculture is changing, technology is entering, large corporations are changing the way agriculture is practiced in India. So the basic question is, how do we make the agricultural workforce fit for jobs outside agriculture? Over the next 60 minutes, we're going to look at every aspect of that fundamental question, put a lot of solutions on the table with your involvement. But there's one anecdote I want to share with you which really gives a face and a feeling to this question. On the road to Jaipur, in fact, just outside Jaipur, there's a man with a push cart, a thela, and he sells eggs. He's got a little card up there on his thela which has his name and his degrees, Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Education. So of course I stopped and asked him, why do you sell eggs if you have 2 bachelor's degrees? And he said, that's what all of us do. So it's not just about education, it's about skilling to meet the real needs of the new Indian economy. Spearheading this discussion will be our special guest, Minister of Commerce and Industry, Kamal Nath, Joerres, Chairman and CEO, Manpower, Rajendra Pawar, Chairman of the NIIT Group, R. Seshasayee, Managing Director of Ashok, Leyland, and Kamath, Managing Director and CEO of ICICI Bank. But first, Minister Kamal Nath with his opening thoughts.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be here with you today. This is the 5th summit I'm attending, and I think I'm quite worn out now. But when we were at this last summit and the summit before that and the summit before that, we met under circumstances when the global economic outlook was booming. There was a sense of confidence. And when we meet today, I'm sure last year nobody thought that when they come here next year, we'll be coming here just after the G20 meeting in Washington about salvaging economies in the Western world or the financial system. But nevertheless, the attendance here does not reflect that there is much gloom in India. Of course, there's concern, and India will continue on its growth trajectory. Obviously, we have been impacted by a percentage, 1 point, 2 points, perhaps 2.5 points. We do believe that the Indian economy has the resilience to overcome this. However, I have just returned last night, late last night, from the heartland of India, a subject which we are discussing today when we are talking of inclusive growth. There is the India which you see on your television screens, on your laptop screens, and now even on your phone screens with the 3G. Then there is the other India from which I come. The other India where if I was to talk in my own district of 8-9% growth, people would think that they have elected the wrong person. Because when we talk of this growth, is this growth inclusive? And I'm very happy that there is a program addressing the issue of inclusive growth. I don't know how much time I have. Do you want me to just, well, I think I'll pause here and let everybody else kick it off and perhaps come into this a bit later. But what I want to say is there is the real India, there is the virtual India. The real India, which has 650 million people engaged in agriculture, as was just said. But the real India is also 300 million people less than $1 a day, 500 million people, give or take 50 million, who are at $2 a day. So here, when we talk of inclusive growth, we just don't talk of inclusive growth of 5, 10, 15, 20 million. We talk of numbers of 600, 700 million people coming into the mainstream of growth. And when we talk of that growth, we necessarily have to talk of rural India. And when we talk of rural India, we have to talk of agriculture. And we got to look at how the growth process affects every section of society and in all parts of the country. I think that is the biggest challenge in a democracy. A democracy which cannot have all-inclusive growth or show that the government of the day is endeavoring for all-inclusive growth doesn't have much of a chance to survive. So that is the biggest challenge in India as not only the largest democracy, but as the rowdiest democracy. It even becomes more challenging than any other country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nath. Jeff, you have a perspective that straddles the globe, and your experiences include China, include India, and of course the Western world as well. Your opening thoughts.
Thank you. You know, the challenge that you discuss is a challenge that we see throughout the world, whether it be in South America or China, where there are, in some that would say is the have and the have-nots, those that, you know, have the opportunity to proceed and get into the cities, and you see so much of the attention focused on the cities. But what happens out of that is that if you do not have momentum and create momentum, it's very difficult to suddenly go from a stop to a start. And I think when we look at India, and when I look at India relative to the rest of the world, it's that momentum and that ability to continue to go forward that really will be the advantage. So it's how do you use those advantages of that India that is on the mobile screen or on the television in order to get into the rural areas. Clearly the cities will get larger, and as the cities get larger, that will create some more stress. But what happens in this, and what we have seen, whether it be in Shanghai and China, which have the exact same type of challenges, is it's a multifaceted approach to education, vocational technical training, and spot training. In other words, bringing that labor force up to speed as quickly as possible. Because there are so many social impacts associated with this training that if you actually find, a country finds itself not being able to make those transitions quickly enough, you get so much discontent. So out in the rural areas, you really get the discontent, and then as they move into the cities and they do not have the appropriate jobs in the cities and the appropriate training, you actually get more discontent. What we see across the world is that partnership between governments and private sector. And those partnerships create a very, very powerful way of taking that gap of no job to training to job. Because it's just as disingenuous to have no job in training and then have no job after the training. And that's where the private partnerships come in place, is to be able to actually find those positions and bring those positions to bear right away. So there is a bifurcation. There's a bifurcation between the rural and the urban, and those countries that have really succeeded with that have done that with a tremendous partnership between private and the government.
Mr. Seshasayee, Indian manufacturing.
Thank you. I must also confess that I'm just as worn out as the Minister. Probably this is the 6th or the 7th summit that I'm participating, and my observations therefore might sound a bit of a repetition. Inclusive growth, in the manner in which it has occurred in India, I think needs to be focused on. There has been this National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. There has been controversy about it, but let me say that it is that which has created the rural demand, and that rural demand is what is today, in a way, sustaining even the growth that we have. And that's because it is necessary to put purchasing power to enable people to participate in the marketplace when they don't have the ability to participate by themselves. But that's a very short-term situation. The more medium, long-term situation is to quite clearly to develop skills so that they have the wherewithal to participate in the market. Now, to do that, let me also say that this is not something that we need to now, in a way, start discovering new models. Migration is taking place relentlessly, not because there is mechanization taking place and therefore productivity is improving and therefore people are getting thrown out of job. It's simply because the population increase is not being absorbed by the agriculture sector, and therefore there is a great deal of migration taking place anyway. And skills are getting developed anyway. In fact, if I look at most of my factories, most of my workmen probably have had an agricultural farm background, particularly those which are in hinterland near in the farm areas. So much so that at the time of the harvest, it's a common experience for most of us to lose a lot of people, great deal of absenteeism taking place at that point of time. But I think there is one major difference that I think we now need to focus on, and that's the fact that unlike the past where people were coming and learning their skills on the job now, we are moving on to higher level of technology in the shop floor. Not so much that there is a technology development happening in the farm, but because it is happening in the shop floor, which requires not merely on-the-job training, but preparatory training. And that is going to get crucial. And therefore, you will end up having a huge divide of industry not having sufficient skills, at the same time people not being able to get enough jobs on the farm floor. To marry these two, the key issue is to overhaul our secondary education system. And that's really crying for a reform now. There is no way that we can get people to be declared pass or fail on the basis whether they can remember the Pythagoras theorem or the year in which the Sepoy mutiny took place, but based on the fact whether they have a skill, particular relevant skill to do a job or not. Therefore, we need to have a secondary education system which combines some part of academics, but very much a part of skill development. That, I think, is a key that we should really focus on.
Mr. Kamath?
Let me just push the same argument that Sesh was making, but connect it up with something that Minister Kamal Nath said. See, we are talking of several Indias and with several levels of incomes. I think what I think is key to our growth is to maintain growth at all these Indias. Of course, they are one India. We are only talking of it from a cut in terms of income levels. And there is the opportunity. That is the big opportunity that is India, because you got each one of these groups with the earning potentials which are different today. As they migrate up, I think that creates in itself a virtuous cycle of demand, and that itself then pushes economic activity, creates jobs and brings people up, I would say, the curve as it were. I think to do that, we need to engage. We need to engage in a variety of ways. One, of course, we cannot at this stage afford to take our leg off the overall economic driver, the overall economic growth that we are aspiring for. I think it is in that context that despite everything that's happening around the world, we would need to see how we can peg, let us say 8% as our aspirational growth, down from 10%. Otherwise, we should have pegged 10%, but given what is happening around the globe, can we peg 8% as growth as our target and then work towards it? What is it that we need to do to achieve that? So within that context, then we provide opportunities to grow in an inclusive manner. I think I will also underscore what Sesh said. And I guess that it is not just in technical areas that vocational skilling is required. I think vocational skilling is going to be required in a wider variety of areas, because we are talking of an India where today, whether we like it or not, 60% of the GDP is coming from the services sector, with 20-25% coming in from the manufacturing sector or the industrial sector. And that 60% of the GDP drive piece, which is the services sector, has its own needs in a variety of businesses which are again today unskilled. And that is why you find people selling those eggs on the street side with a degree. Now these people, even before they had a degree, could have been skilled for one of the services jobs and could have been mainstreamed much earlier. And indeed, if he had a degree or she had a degree, could have been skilled and again taken in what I would call a mid-level job in the service economy. So I think that's where the challenge is. What is heartening to note is that Skills Development Corporation is now clearly there. It's not envisaged, it is there, and I think it is getting activated as we speak. And I think it will act as a catalyst to start the process. I can say this, till 2 years back nobody talked about skilling as a challenge. But in 2 years the government has started talking very seriously of skilling as a challenge. Industry has talked of skilling as a challenge, and industry association also are talking of skilling as a challenge. So I think this path to inclusive development, wherein you provide employability to the people of this country, becomes, I think, a strong driver in in inclusive development. I'll stop at this.
Mr. Pawar, I know you have... Mr. Nath.
Well, I hear what should be done, and everybody, I've heard this many times, how we've tapped one India, we need to tap another India. Let me take you down another road. Let me take you down a road where it's happening and how we can simulate it when we talk of inclusive growth. It was about 2 years ago that when the CII met me, I said that, well, the next meeting I will have with the CII only when you come to my district. I don't want to meet you in Delhi, I don't want to meet you in Bombay. So if you want to meet me in my district. I don't think I was taken seriously then, but then when there was no meeting for 2 months or 3 months, the CII said that, okay, when should we meet you? So I gave them an appointment in my district, which has 1.9 million people, out of which 1.2 million are perhaps less than $1 a day. It's taken me 28 years of my life to bring up 600,000, about $1 a day. And so sure enough, all the captains of CII, I don't want to take the names, but all the famous names, they sat in a plane and arrived in my district. When they arrived there, I said that, now how do you expect me? Let's go out. They said, what's the program? I said, there's no program. I'm doing the following things today, you can accompany me. So I was going to a wedding. So I took them with me to a wedding, a village wedding. And at that wedding I asked them, do you expect me to tell these people here that we have 9% growth which we were having that year? And I must thereafter compliment CII. And that they decided, they announced the setting up of an office in my district. I'll take you down another road. I tell my friends, many of the captains of industry here, that why don't you give jobs to people from rural India? Why do you give jobs to only those who have suit, boots and ties? They've got skills, they may not have the necessary skills, but they have potential skills, they have been trained. And I asked the biggest names in the IT sector. I said, here are applications, and you come to me, you want support from government. Now, you measure your company in terms of rupees. I measure my balance sheet is in number of people. And how can you help them? So they said, we got our HR, we got this process, we got this, we got that. I gave one big company. I don't know if they're here. I don't mind naming them because they played a great part in helping me. I told Wipro, I'm giving you 100 applications. Please hire some of them. And I said, I don't want you, this is not a pension scheme, but I want you to look at these seriously. Sure enough, they did. They called them for an interview, and out of 100, they rejected all of them. I realized that this is not going to work. I said the first thing they did wrong was to call them to Delhi for an interview. And when people come from rural India and they come to Delhi and see those fancy offices, for them it's a cultural shock. So they all failed. I gave them another 100 applications and asked them to conduct the interview somewhere closer to my district. And they conducted another interview out of the next 100, and they took 2 people. I realized this is not going to happen in my lifetime. Then I'm happy. I called my friend Rajendra, and I said that why shouldn't NIIT do a finishing school or something like that? And he told me, NIIT gives out franchises, and we have a franchise model, and we can have a franchise in your district. I said, okay, send me the contract, I'll become your franchisee. He said, you'll become our franchisee? I said, yeah, I'll become your franchisee. I don't know why he didn't want that, but anyway, he didn't.
Power equation would be upside down.
So he said, let me work on a model. And here is one of the classic examples, and I see sitting here in this room, which I'm going to say, I see them by chance, who played that role. So he said, give me time, let me work on a model. We don't have any model to do all these kind of things in a place which we don't know how to get to, we can't find in the map. I said, well, come up with a model. In about 8 months, during those 8 months, we talked, we discussed, he said, I'm working on it. In 8 months, NIIT came up with a model which I think needs to be replicated across the country. They came up with a model of a knowledge center. He'll tell you what they did.
That's exactly what Mr. Pawar is going to talk about.
Yeah,
That
absolutely. That's
model
it. Now I
and
want
how-
you to tell them about the model. Then I want to tell you what CII did. And I see here how CII used to talk to a skill center. CII set up a skill center. CII set up a skill center with Larsen and Toubro, with Punj Lloyd, training people in various skills. This was set up about 2 months ago and is a big hit. There are those who are past the 8th class or the 9th class, because we are not looking at growth only of those who've been through IITs and IIMs and who've been through very high, one of the top institutions. We are looking at those who are school dropouts. The millions of those who are who just passed the 8th class or the 9th class, we're looking at all those. What do we do with them? And I remember when I went to see a L&T site, a Larsen and Toubro site, and I saw North Korean, I saw some Chinese-looking workmen there. So I asked the project manager that, who are these? They were operating, this was in Dubai, a construction site. And they said, this is North Korean labor. I said, well, don't you have Indians who can operate and do this? They said, there's a shortage of skills. Mr. Naik, you remember that? Now, Larsen and Toubro is a part of a CII skill center, which is training people for cranes, crane operators. JCB came into it. Punj Lloyd came into it. The cement companies came into it. And that's how it goes. So now, I think, Rajendra, you must tell them, but don't tell them how much I harassed you. Don't tell me. Just tell them the good part.
I'll only tell them why I didn't want Mr. Kamal Nath as a franchisee, because the equation becomes upside down. So anyway, I think first to step back a little when we look at inclusive growth, and the question here was how to move people from agriculture to manufacturing. My view is that's the wrong problem to solve to start with. If 65% of people are in agriculture, 25% in industry, and 10% in the knowledge society, one is to say that within those 65, 25, and 10, how do we upscale the skills so that productivity improves so that they can earn more? I think that's the more basic question, because it's not about what's happening at the fringes. So now within each of these sectors, there are hundreds of skill types. And in the industrial world, they are catalogued as trades. In the agricultural area, they're not very well catalogued. And in the knowledge society, they're evolving very rapidly. So the first step really is to look at these categories of skills, because the point has been made that there are specific things a person should be able to do with productivity and quality, and we are not training them to do it. So this would be part one, which is that there are hundreds of skill types and categories which need to be catalogued, and you have to train people to those skills. The second thing we talk about is what are generally termed as the 21st century skills, the skill of collaboration, the skill of communication, learning to learn, information skills, which go across all these sectors. So the first thing about skills is there's a systematic way to identify them, to catalog them, to equip, and to prepare a system to build these skills in a predictable fashion, rather than doing general education, general training, and therefore you get the bachelor's degrees, people doing what they don't know how to do. That's part one. Then now coming to this question, Mr. Kamal Nath, the exercise we did, the basic problem in the smaller towns is the viability. If we have to do a business model which is predicated on an entrepreneur putting investments, creating a value proposition, and recovering a price which makes it sustainable, then the first block we find is that that price cannot be afforded by the community at that level. So in that business model, we have to find, first of all, we have to crack that problem. That how are we going to create a model which brings the price down? So what we did here was we realized that it has to be a multi-stakeholder game. And every stakeholder has to have a vested interest because of which they will participate. So it's not that you start, making people guilty that you make money, you do nothing here, come and do it here. That's not sustainable. It's not scalable. Till such time as you put the moral pressure or physical pressure, people will do things, but it's not scalable. So what we did was we looked at this whole issue that there are a few hundred students who graduate every year in this place called Chhindwara. And they hang around there because for them to make the jump from Chhindwara to a town or a city, just this social skill is necessary to make the transition, even if they're brilliant, because the brilliance is not distributed by wealth or by region. How do they make the social skills? So we said, okay, these are potential employees of companies. And when we were doing this work, fortunately at that time there was a huge skill gap in every sector. So we said we'll start with IT, and we've done subsequently in other sectors like retail as well. So we took IT as the first area. And then we talked to all the IT companies. And given the relationships, given the fact that it's, still most of them are first generation entrepreneurs and good friends, we told them to send their HR people to come and spend a couple of days to see these kids who were coming and spending time. And those people drew two very simple conclusions. One is that these kids are no less bright than the city kids, except that they don't have the skills, social skills, technical skills, and so on. That was one conclusion. Second interesting conclusion which the HR people told us is that we are sick and tired of the arrogance of the city fellows who come looking for jobs, but we find such a good work ethic in these people because they're eager. So that got us started to say, okay, now you have to do this step of putting your best foot forward, get involved with us to select before they do the training program. So the aptitude is tested, the values are tested. We will train them, but you will do two things. One is that you will give a scholarship to these kids instead of paying to the firm which hires in a city for you. You spend X. You give them a scholarship. We will equip them to your needs. And then you have some faith when you take these, train a batch of 15 or 20 or 30, and you've done the selection in the beginning. We've trained them to NIIT standards. You hire them and give them a year. That's the risk you're taking. At the end of the year, if they don't come up to the mark, let them go. So we got them to have a vested interest, which is to get talent at a lower cost because these people are happier with lower salaries, with maybe a higher level of intellect than the average person they're hiring in town because we're getting to the bottom of the heap in terms of intellect in big cities with shortage of skills. Then our big question was the cost of infrastructure, because in education and training that's the biggest cost of infrastructure. There we told Mr. Kamal Nath that it is our belief that there's a lot of unused government assets. In big cities we see it, we don't know about your place. And sure enough, we pointed out to a little building which has some 10 or 12 rooms, abandoned for the last few years. It was a nursing training center, didn't work. And I had pictures, unfortunately we couldn't show them. So we took that and there's a lease agreement for virtually nothing. So this is the role of this stakeholder, which is the local government, to put a building which is unused. And the country has millions of such buildings. So government's role was to put the real estate. Employer's role was to give a scholarship to the child and then to give them a chance. Then we talked to the technology companies. We talked to Cisco, Dell, blah, 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 blah. All of them are looking at the bottom of the pyramid. So we told them, you want to build business models? You'll find the business model, but you have to come 1 foot forward. They all came forward. And then more recently, now we have some NGOs because we have to get a social engagement with the students. We have to work with them. We have to work with their families to give them the confidence. So we have NGOs. And now we are finding some sponsors, that is companies who like the idea, willing to support it. So we have 5 set of stakeholders. Each has a vested interest. There are more than 400 students, and a couple of months ago we had the first batch coming out and all were employed. The whole batch was employed by, I think, Infosys and a couple of other companies. So I think what we see here is a model which multiple stakeholders are difficult to manage. All of us know that. But that's the only way in which you can get contributions from each stakeholder in a vested interest model. And I think it's going to scale. We are starting the second one. There we will look at the retail sector, which has huge employment, not just IT. And I think they have very different skill sets. And I do want to say that it is perhaps the most advanced center of NIIT anywhere in the world out of the 34 countries we operate. The faculty are sitting anywhere in the country and the teaching into students sitting there. We are currently spending 3 times the amount of time for the same set of skills because students have a handicap. But we want to take it to 2 times, then we want to take it to 1.5 times, and we're using technology very innovatively. So business model with stakeholders and technology, extensive innovation. I think we are being able to prove that it's workable. And I just wanted to say the vested interest for Mr. Kamal Nath. I asked him this question. I said, how many jobs, additional jobs coming out of this center will make you feel more invincible in your constituency? He said 400. So we think this model will do more than 400. Now what he's promised me is that there are 700 other MPs. So we have a scalability of 700 times once we make it happen.
Thank you so much for sharing that real example with us. I'm going to take a couple of steps back here because we've addressed a whole host of issues. Let me just go back to a couple of fundamental questions. When we're talking about reskilling people, are there a set of skills in rural India, Mr. Seshasayee, that have the potential to be recognized by business and just fine-tuned, or is it reinventing the wheel?
No, certainly I think there are skills which are very, very relevant to manufacturing shop floor. I think the skill of using simple equipment efficiently. You must remember that the rural sector, rural market works under tremendous constraints. And therefore, under challenging environment, they have quite often mastered the art of, say, repair work, getting more life out of a small equipment endlessly. I think the ability to put back something in operation is a very, very important skill. And we have seen that skill coming into very useful kind of play when we have, say, truck service maintenance centers and so on. Those who with the rural background are generally the ones who have the knack, the mechanical skills of repair work. Now the only caution that I have is, but that's now, and things are changing very rapidly. We're going to see electronic chips all over the place, including in a truck. Now that's where I'm saying that this skill is going to be no longer all that relevant. So we need preparatory skills, and which is where I think the point that Rajendra made is relevant. My only suggestion on this is, I think we are starting off after the secondary school education is over and trying to do something because of the fact that the secondary education has not provided enough value. So we are creating value from almost the ground up. Whereas the right thing we ought to be doing is to look at the education system as we now deliver, to put enough value into that. So Rajendra does not have to do 2 times or 3 times the effort.
But there is a starting being made with the ITIs and sort of revitalizing them through public-private partnership. Any thoughts on that, Mr. Kamath?
I think almost every state has understood that the ITIs that we had needed revitalizing in this new context. And every state that at CII we have tried to engage with wants to engage a set of private players who will come in and then run this in a way that it ought to be run in today's context. I think that is happening. I guess that the efforts that Mr. Kamal Nath described and Mr. Pawar described, I think we now have a model which is workable. We now need to scale it. Then if we do that, a whole lot of efficiencies come in, because today, whenever a new project is set up, it is not uncommon if there are going to be 50,000 construction workers, for them to go through a training before they actually go on the job. I think that gets eliminated, costs come down, speed to market is faster, and then you also have people without then distorting, I would say, the employment scenario, where you have to carry extra people just so that you take care of attrition, because attrition will happen. So this becomes a virtuous cycle. And since we don't have a shortage in the context of the number of people who come into the job market every year, that's upwards of 10 million. 10 to 15 million is the number, but let's assume it's around 10 million who actually come and seek a job. I don't think there is a problem in the inflow. It's a problem in making sure that they're skilled right and putting them on. And the models that just now were explained by, Mr. Pawar here, can apply across any sector. And I will, not to push the point, but just to close the point as it were, in financial services we have run a similar model with them, where we have set up a vehicle because he wants to sponsor. In fact, we made him the sponsor. We are the very minority stakeholder there, to train people in financial services. It's a finishing school, the same terminology. So what used to take us 4 months to train on the once they joined us, and thereafter 8 to 12 months for the person to come up to speed, through a finishing school process, they bring the person up to speed in 4 to 6 months. So you eliminate a whole lot of waste in terms of time once the person is in a job, productivity levels improve, and attrition goes down. Because we gave the curriculum, initial curriculum, they developed it, and we have said that the person who comes out can join any financial institution, need not come to our bank or any one of our companies. So I think the efforts that are on is to increase the pool of human capital, and I think that becomes one way of tackling this.
You know, there are many individual successful examples. I think the challenge is to bring it all together so that it's not patchy, there's a national coordinated effort. Jeff, you have an example from China of how it has to be pushed in a sense. The umbrella push has to come from government, right?
Well, it clearly does, but of course government can slow some things down at times, and therefore there is the back and forth of how do I really make that work. And one of the things that I want to add is what we have seen in China and what we've seen in South America is training programs like that are even better when they are front-ended at times with assessment programs. In other words, doing a job in a manufacturing facility requires concentration, the ability to do repetitive work, the ability to do quality work, the same in the banking industry. And the more that we can do, and what the governments are looking for, is to make those dollars as effective and efficient as possible. So one of those filters is when you have all of this human capital, which channel should I put them down? And now when I put them down, the training becomes much more efficient, have a higher impact on the outside. Because the one thing that we have to remember is these people really want the job. The worst thing is you train them, bring them into the job, and it's really not what they want to do. It's not what they like to do. They leave the workforce, and you've actually destroyed more of the momentum than gained the momentum. So what we have found is what the Chinese government has worked on with us is assessment criteria for different types of jobs before they go into the training programs, whether it be vocational training or more spot training. And that has really created almost a threefold increase in the output of the productive worker. And that was supported by the government because they wanted to make sure their dollars were being used much more effectively.
There's one fundamental issue at the base of all this. Do you take the jobs to the people? Do you move the people to the jobs? And in this case, we're talking about agricultural workers, rural workers, and the moment you talk about taking jobs to the people so that we don't have to deal with the ill effects of migration to cities and towns that are already cramped, you have, particularly in manufacturing, the challenge of winning the trust of the local community. I won't go into specific projects, but there are large projects in India that are running into trouble despite the assurance of training and potential jobs away from agriculture into industry. Mr. Nath, is that a problem that you've digested?
One big change which has taken place in the last 10 years, more so in the last 5 years, if you look across rural India, people never wanted to leave their districts, their villages. They wanted a job there. But what we've seen is greater mobility. There is tremendous mobility, a sense of mobility where they are willing to go anywhere. Obviously, they'd like to go to a place where they'll understand the language, they'll have the same food. But even if it's not that, if you go to some of the factories in South India, of course, predominantly there are South Indian workmen, but there is a sprinkling of people from North India, from people from Central India, from people from other parts of India. This was not the case in the past. You know, the only mobility you had was workmen who came from Bihar and some from UP. You know, so it was the classic case that you went anywhere, you found somebody from Bihar or somebody from Punjab. but you never found anybody from other states. This sense of mobility wasn't there. This great sense of mobility has come. So now it's not a question of taking jobs to the people. If the people have the skills, they are mobile, they are looking beyond, and this is happening by the month, by the week, by the hour. They are looking at opportunities. The internet, the television has made all this accessible. Even job seeking has now become a different game, provided you have the skills. The real challenge is, I don't want to sound critical, but is that we all will, we somehow tend to talk about skills, but the magnitude in which it is needed. Textile, in our textile sector, we have a huge shortage. There are so many studies done in India of skilled people. And when we talk of employing people who are not skilled, we are talking about lesser productivity. There are productivity issues, so you want to have the most skilled people so that you have greater productivity with greater competition. Competitiveness is driving this also because you want to start day one. You want that workman to be producing as much as somebody who's been there 3 years. You want him to have those skills. The technology, the manufacturing technologies are changing so fast. So skill development is a big challenge, skill development in any sector. I was looking at, in my ministry of footwear, and Footwear Technology Development Institute. Nobody's even heard of it, right?
I've been to it.
Yeah, you've been to it, okay. But nobody sitting in this room would probably heard of the FTDI, Footwear Technology Development Institute. We realized that it's overflowing. There are people there who want to get in there. I found people coming, writing to me that, can you help us to get admission? And I wondered what this was all about. Why was it doing so well that everybody wanted to go there? And I found that there's a great skill shortage. We are putting up 5 of these. Now, I mean government. And I completely agree with my friend that government slows things down. Of course, then we say, okay, we got to do this process, we got to go do that process, whether it meets with budgets, whether it does that. The real answer lies in what the CII is doing in the skill development program, which I have seen a model in my own district, is for industry, for the business community, for chambers, for associations, to be doing this. These classic cases, there are 2 classic cases which are live. And we need to replicate these, we need to learn from these, and then only will it happen. So when you talk also of land, now in India you have states which have very high density of population. You have states which don't. Now you may have a classic case of the nano which had to pull out of West Bengal. Now that's one case.
And there was the promise of training and jobs away from
Yeah,
agriculture
yeah.
and all of the allure
okay.
of that.
Now that, for whatever reasons, I don't want to comment on that. That's gone and buried. But the lesson to learn from that is that industry must look at not the dense states. If you're going to look at the dense states, you're not going to even have inclusive growth. Why don't they look at states which don't have dense populations? There was this question of SEZs getting land. Now, there is a state like Kerala, which has a very high density. You have Haryana also, which has got now a lot of development. Land is becoming very costly. But there are states like UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, my own state, where the people say, please take our land for free. Okay? If somebody says that I am going to set up an industry, or I am going to set up a SEZ, the people say, please take our land for free. Okay? All we want is you train and give us jobs. That's all.
Right, Ms.? Absolutely.
I think this whole question of migration, I don't think we should look at this as a problem. In fact, I would even argue that we do not have enough migration in this country. We should have a lot more migration, but we should have orderly migration. We need to have migration taking place to towns and cities which are well planned and where we have an orderly progression and not have a problem of the infrastructure getting under strain in only a few cities. But if we don't do that and we only insist on spatial planning, the jobs being taken to the people there, you will make industry uncompetitive. And I think this is a fundamental issue that we have to face up to.
Just to touch on a point which is that with technology moving the way it is, and I talked about 65% green collar workers, if that's what you call them, and blue collar and grey collar, let's say. So as more and more of the service activities increase, there it is possible to move the work to the person, right? In green, the agricultural thing, the guy has to be there. Factories where we consume land and therefore we can make choices of where to go and where not to go. But for example, there are a few million, I think 3 million retired school teachers in India, many in rural areas. And it's a matter of time before you can make it viable for them to have a little, what I call a studio in a box in their home. And they could be teaching people anywhere. So now, therefore my view is that if you look at the Western world and say, I live in so-and-so village, that's upper end, right? Because you live in a natural environment. All of us want to live there, just that we are forced to come into a lousy city because that's where the money is. Now the the grey collar jobs, the knowledge jobs can move to people. And so when we say India is a back office for many things, those jobs could be anywhere. We are now seeing evidence. We have some of the companies in the IT sector who are doing BPO out of villages. Now I would rather that those kids stay there and live a healthy life and stay with their family and not commute and not burn up fuel and do the job because it can be done. So I think going forward we have to recognize that the green collar worker should move to grey collar to the extent that that movement is happening without displacing people, because the land is there, it's natural, it's more dispersed. So I think that should be factored in. I'm not trying to say we don't need workers to move to factories, they will have to move to factories. But there's a huge headroom available with the new economy and the fact that these jobs can move from across the world and are moving, and it's happened. We have, I mean, these things have been done already, that there are maths tutors in English tutors in English teaching kids in the US. So.
Absolutely. Minister Nath, I know you have a tight schedule and commitments ahead in the day. Thank you very much for joining us for this session. It's been a pleasure.
I'm sorry, you know, we have today in Delhi, I do not know whether it's because of the summit, I have 5 ministers from different countries here. I've just finished with the Romanian and I've got to go to the program with the Egyptian president, the Egyptian minister. Then I have the minister from the UK. I have the minister from Belarus. I have the minister from, I forget, you know, I'm just trying to, I'm just trying to.
Well, thank you very much for making the time.
Minister I have. Well, anyway, thank you very much. I've enjoyed being here again.
We are, ladies and gentlemen, going to continue with interactions with the audience. I think we'll give it 60 seconds, and then we'll continue with our discussion. Well, being a journalist myself, I can predict that that should wind up in about another 45 seconds. Apologies for that. You know, we've put a whole bunch of issues on the table, and I think we've talked a lot about solutions. This hasn't been a very problem-oriented discussion so far. I'm going to throw it open to all of you. One request, if you could speak into the mic, introduce yourselves, and direct your question to one of the panelists or all of them. Please go ahead.
Visti Banaji from Godrej. I'm also on the CII National HR Committee for Skills and HR. I felt that while all the suggestions that came from the panel gave some credit to what the government is doing, I feel we owe it to those of our guests who are not from this country to share the substantial progress industry-government collaboration has generated in the past few years. We did hear about the IIT partnership, the extent to which, under the aegis of the Planning Commission, resources are being pumped into the IITs, I think we will see a sea change in the quality and coverage of trades which come out of the ITIs. Sorry for saying IITs. We did not touch upon the modular education program, which again the Planning Commission, together with CII and other ministries, is supporting. It's a huge, very promising program. What it requires us to do in industry is to be open to the kind of things which Rajendra Pawar was saying. We need to be able to recruit people for their competencies and not based on preconceived notions of qualification, caste, or whatever. I think the slowdown in the economy gives us a substantial opportunity to get our trade education house in order. And going forward, the next 2-3 years, if we don't have the crazy 9% growth which we've been trying to source, I think when we resume our growth trajectory with what's happening on modular and trade education, we'll be much better placed to have sustainable growth. Thank you.
Right here, Mr. Naik.
Hello. Minister mentioned about Larsen Togro's involvement in his district, but this he called me because, you know, L&T has taken upon training 40,000 people across the country. And that we have selected 10 centers, and each center is call it a hub, which will connect with as many IITs as the government is willing to give on public-private partnership and ITI. And of course, the point in here is we want flexibility. We want to change the caliber, the syllabus. We want to be able to attract better teachers. And whichever government is helping us do that, we are enthused to be able to really go directly to the ITIs, improve their staff, change the curriculum more practically in line with what is wanted in the market, and including pay better salaries than the government pays at our cost. And we have also an experiment going on of 6 centers which will only deal with school dropouts. All-inclusive program in the sense that you first continuously motivate them to go for higher studies. But many backward class students, I mean children, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, too many compulsion, do not wish to go. One such center is in my own village, right? First and foremost, I think most people who are really at the helm of the corporates should visit villages to get a feel of it, directly feel of it. I happen to have come from village. I go twice a year to see the pulse of what's really the real problems. So one such school dropout, we run in my village education institutions, higher education institution, the hospital, and so on. Now we have started also the school dropout center. And in the school who finally cannot move up, we take them in. We have done now 3 batches in the last 1 year. And the appropriate trade we have taken is tractor mechanic, wireman, and these people who are not available, we gave them a rate card that if you engine tune, you charge 200 rupees. Each one therefore is moving around with the toolkit, village after village, and majority of them are employed. Now, that possibly is an appropriate there. Some other place near the manufacturing hub, you need other kinds of skills.
Mr. Naik, I'm curious to ask you one question. As you take on this training program and the skill development program, do you find that the people who come out of your system, your training system, are actually very marketable even in your overseas projects? I mean, is there a demand for them there as well?
Well, I can only tell you that we suffer from it. There is so much demand because there are advertisements which come saying L&T trained people need not be interviewed. So, I mean, once they come out of our education center, most of them become employable. Obviously, we employ some, but 75% go to the different places in other manufacturing industry, and lot goes to Gulf, lot. Some of them on our projects, some elsewhere. But most important part is that one has to participate directly on the ground. And we have these hubs now which will pick up the better ones from the ITIs to Advanced Training Center. And the Advanced Training Center, from there it will go to the shop floor for the final training, on-the-job training, and then they get employed. But I think the other thing is, as somebody said, we have to take jobs near the village, in a smaller town, smaller districts, and not restrict to, as I say, 12 cities in India shine, the rest of the country has a different story altogether. So the jobs have to move, the factories have to move, and only manufacturing, really, and building infrastructure, I'm not advocating because we do it, create jobs in the rural India. When you start building roads in the rural India, thousands of people get employed. When you take factories to the villages, well, not villages, but a district, which is really much smaller than the main towns, the district gets developed.
Right.
So it has to be all inclusive, and by the way, one of the states where we have now started have already aligned 3 ITIs with our, what we call a hub. And they have offered us 8 more with full flexibility of what we want to do. And if the other state government give us that flexibility, that around those 10 centers, we would end up being in 80 to 100 ITIs on a public-private partnership. This we have taken as one of the contribution L&T must make for the the rural society, the poorer part of India, the underprivileged part of India. And we are very, very keen to continue this journey without, in fact, and this has become universal now among our management staff, who all are committed to it. And I tell them, first go to the village, visit them. And I think it is very important that we don't discuss only in the rooms without knowing exactly what the situation is.
On the ground.
And on the ground. Thank you.
I would just like to add to that and the previous comment. We as an organization have had a great experience where we've opened a training center in Nagapatnam and Teragumbade after the tsunami. And the work with the public-private and what we were able to do with the government of Tamil Nadu, and then more specifically in Nagapatnam and Teragumbade, is actually putting out 500 to 600 people every 6 months into skills ranging from seamstress to mason to others. And I think that those kinds of partnerships actually do work. And one of the things that we have found is that the individuals themselves are immensely motivated when they can actually see the job on the other side, and when there is a short gap between the training and the job on the other side.
You know, Mr. Seshasayee, I just want to make a brief reference to a comment you'd made about the National Rural Employment Guarantee Program. In the short term, that's clearly going to create assets, create jobs, and upgrade skills as well. And I'm sure people in our audience will take that further with questions as well. Sir.
My name is Harpal Singh from Ranbaxy. I just wanted to get a little response from the panelists. You know, we are talking about finding solutions from existing technologies that are available in the manufacturing world, or for that matter, in the services world. And if you really add up some of these numbers of 500 people, 40,000 people, and maybe 100,000 people, and that really doesn't add up to very much if you look at in the context of the challenge that India faces. And I think it's important for us, and I think industry has a role to play here. What is the new technologies and the methods that we will use? Where is this examination of new models and new technologies? Where is effort going in? Partly, I think, a little touch of that, what Rajendra mentioned, about this question of saying it took me 8 months to go back and think of a model that we could actually then introduce and possibly put in the marketplace to see whether it will. The question I think we need to ask ourselves is, all this seems to be to try and fit what has happened in the past into a challenge which is dramatically different for the future.
And you know, you're also presenting the numbers. You're saying our examples are 400, 40,000. We're talking about 600 million.
And therefore, can the panelists please say, what is that new paradigm change Are we to look for new technologies, new methods, new models, if the challenge for India has to be addressed? Because nowhere, and I think this is not my term, this is a term, it's not a question of following best practice or looking at some of the models. It's actually to create next practice. And maybe that's something the panelists might wish to comment on.
Yes,
I think the good news is that the science of learning has been known for decades. But there was not appropriate technology available in the past. So there are two, I mean, I'm oversimplifying. One part of the technology is the connection, the connectivity. And I think that's moving quite rapidly, whether it goes through fiber optic or it comes through satellite, and the costs are falling rapidly. So that is one aspect. So when I talk about the 2 million teachers who are retired who can train 20 million kids, the connectivity is a very important part of it, and there's huge amount of revolution happening, including wireless, broadband, and so on, and falling prices. So the prices are falling rapidly. So there's a trend which deals with one of the problem, which is the connecting the learner to another learner, which is a very important way of learning, and to the teacher. So that is one. Or to the knowledge which is residing in electronic form. The other is the role of computing in this, which is there's a piece of stuff to be learned, and there's a learner, and they have to engage with each other. Now we know that teaching learning is not just about the book and me. It's about what happens in the corridors of the school and the college, the social process, the collaboration process. So it is today becoming possible to build content on anything, and the more concrete the skill is, the more man-machine equation alone can solve it. But the moment you start going into more abstract skills or soft skills, then you need other people. So you can build learning content which simulates situations, learning content like when you see kids playing on video games, the motor skills get developed. So like that, again, when we look at skills, learning to learn is a skill, you can do that using technology. So you use technology not just to engage the learner with the technology or with the content, but with other learners, other teachers, and so on. And so I think the solution now exists. Is a question of putting the business models into place. That's the real missing piece. And where there are falling prices, and for example, today power is still very expensive. So when we do some of these kiosks in villages, you do a satellite connection, and you do, the power is 1/3 of the cost to run that place. But fortunately, that again is a falling prices idea, that over the next 4 or 5 years, the price to generate solar power will come down. So the pieces are in place is the point I wanted to make, Harpal. The science of learning has been known from Skinner and such psychologists. You know, they've done the work of how people think. That's been understood quite well. Role of collaboration is understood enormously. All of us lived through it. If you look back at our own years of college, we learned more sitting outside in the garden or in the corridor. So I think now we are finding ways to use technological implementations to deal with all aspects of learning. I give just one example. An IIM professor would say that he can't deal with more than 50 or 60 students in the IIMs because otherwise quality falls. Now we've done some work with 4 IIMs over the last year and a half, where we've taken that number to 160, the same professors, using distributed delivery, but each learner has their own e-learning content. They're sitting in a group of 4. The faculty is somewhere, the students are somewhere else. So earlier people said, can technology help us to reach the level of a classroom? Which was a wrong question. We said, can technology take us beyond? We just flipped it over, working with IIM for the last 2 years. Now those professors have gone up to 160. And we know that faculty is the biggest, scarcest resource. So 3 times productivity is already achieved. So I think technology can play very, very different kinds of roles, and fortunately it's arriving on the scene. We have to just structure the business model. So the Chhindwara model, most of the teachers are sitting in Delhi. And now TCS was one of the partners, said they will put their software guys who want to teach out of TCS software factories who will come in the studio, and the kids are sitting in the village.
Right,
so
Mr. Seshasayee,
business models have to put into place.
Also wanted to add some thoughts to that.
I thought the answer to Harpal's question was not so much in looking at technology away from the farm, but looking at technology in the farm. That is going to absorb as much people as you possibly can plan. Now, we are so primitive in terms of our mechanization. I think we have a long way to go in terms of simple automation, mechanization of agriculture. When that happens, it does not displace people from the farm. It moves them from one type of work to another type of work. A harvester combine would require driving skills, it requires maintenance skills, it would require even financing skills. So I think we are going to be first getting them to move to that kind of skills by having massive doses of mechanization. Now, we got some problems in terms of the type of land holding we have and so on. But I think that's the core. That brings about productivity improvement, that takes jobs to people there and gives a different kind of skill training to them.
I just want to add something, because we've got a lot of experience in this, in that clearly the numbers get so big that you want to be able to look and solve at that number. What we have seen, whether it be in the UK, which had some massive school dropouts and they had underemployed and unemployed. The United States is the same way. China is the same way. Mexico City is the same way. When we had conferences like this, we talked about solving the big numbers, talked about the big breakthroughs. The challenge is it came with so much stuff attached to it that it couldn't get done. So I think what we have to do is to also to celebrate the 300, the 400, create responsibilities in small areas to do that so that it does grow, and then learn from that, as you've done, Ranj, to really say, okay, maybe there is some breakthroughs. So I think when you try to solve to the big numbers, so many things get hung on to that you can't solve anything. So you've got to really go to the small numbers and have a good view of it and pull things out quickly and replicate them. That's what we have seen actually gets to the bigger numbers faster than trying to solve for something that you just can't get your hands around.
I think we have time for one last question. So there are 5 hands up. No, 6.
I'm Mike Johnston from the United States. Just to the last point, to solve for big numbers, it strikes me that India must work through their public schooling system. In other words, I don't see how any of these programs can deal with 10 million new workers a year. What's happening in the public school system in India to give us hope that in fact that will be the solution to this problem?
Can I answer that question? I think that is truly the solution, and truly that is the problem, because nothing is happening in the school system. And all interventions that are being now thought of are through that system, whereby you start vocational training at a right age, and thereafter if there is a school dropout, even if he is not going to complete his school certificate, let's say he drops out 3 years ahead, he drops out with a skill rather than with no skills at all. I think that is the intervention. And the whole issue of skill development has come to fore only in the last 2 years, frankly. And I think suddenly there is a lot of light thrown at it, attention thrown at it. And I'm sure with the interest that industry is showing, government is responding, I think we will have an intervention which is appropriate. I will just take half a minute to maybe give a rounded picture on this. Yes, indeed, the single intervention is at 400 people, but then you have 600 districts. And I know that in each district there are interventions happening. Suddenly you've got a number which becomes respectable. It gets to be 250,000. And you can do 3 or 4 turns a year with skills, you're talking of 1 million. And there are other areas in which similar interventions happen. I think we will get to speed in quick order in terms of the number we need. Other part is that we started off talking of inclusive development. This is only one way. And yes, we may touch 10 million people. That may touch the families of these 10 million. You multiply that by another 3 or 4, 30 or 40 million. Over 10 years, that would have reached 400 million. But we don't have to wait 10 years. Because what's happening is rural India is also engaging in other ways with, I would say, the market India. The market India of today. But tomorrow, rural India itself will become a market. As rural India in terms of its agricultural produce or other, I would say, produce, links to the market India, there is, I would think, activity that is happening in rural India which will at times outstrip what is happening in urban India or market India. As is today, you have people complaining about drop in sales in urban India, But I don't think anybody who is marketing in rural India is talking of a drop in sales today. So clearly that has become a new engine. So in addition to the 10 million jobs we create, in addition to what that would do in terms of sending money back home, and that has a multiplier effect of maybe 2 or 3, I think rural India itself, the economy is connecting in a much more vibrant way with the urban India. I think at this point in time we are trying to understand this process of change, and I'm sure in future meetings we will be able to understand, appreciate, and build models on this to replicate.
That's an important point you've made. Rural India could be the change agent itself because, as you said, it's an engine of growth. We need to recognize that that engine is actually maturing and chugging along at a good speed. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's been a pleasure interacting with you. I hope you've enjoyed it.
No wonder people and companies that could be anywhere in the